The prosperous city of Liyue is filled with history so deep it may still be relevant in future parts of the story. Most of the characters in this city are tied to an ancient Chinese teaching called Daoism. In this video, I will be explaining what this belief is and how it can be interpolated into the story of Nibelung. We're going to examine the Jade Sovereign in Chinese history, who represented the highest god in the pantheon, or the heavenly principles, along with other gods and its rituals. Through this, we can dissect the consequences of Nibelung's actions and figure out the laws of the world. This theory will take us on quite a bit of a journey as we look at all of the facets of this history mentioned in this game, and we might even talk about some Star Rail paths. The era that our twin travels is a period inspired by Gnosticism. It's just entangled in mathematical theories, Hermetic alchemy, and Buddhism. Between atomic explosions, transmutations, magnetism, and samsaras, it's getting so difficult to pinpoint what happened in the old world. In this series, my goal is to theorize to the end through one single train of thought. This time we'll be using Daoism as a catalyst. On that note, I have my coffee ready, I'm Gemini, and I'm looking for forbidden knowledge. This is a leaks-free theory video. In the first part of this series, we talked about Jade and its importance in Genshin's story. TLDR, Jade is green and it refracts into blue and yellow. Blue energies are spiritual energies in game while yellow symbolize matter. These colors can change hues once they're condensed, as well as the fact that Jade is heavily associated with a dragon's powers, and I theorized that each of the moons had different jades in them, and one of these jades could create golden life. I was knee-deep in my research in the correlation of Deshret and Nibelung when an interesting concept caught my attention. Obviously, Deshret's actions were inspired by ancient Egypt traditions, and more specifically the way that they treat the process of death and rebirth. Of course, I had to explore the possibility that this jade could reincarnate our boy King Deshret. So, in relation to mummification, what I found was the jade burial suit that was used in ancient China instead. This jade suit tradition was quite the crumb trail for me to follow. Back in the Han Dynasty of 206 BCE, jade plaques were sewn together as a custom-fitted garment for high-ranking officials and royalty. This tradition is said to preserve the body from decaying and reaching immortality. These were obviously super heavy and expensive to make, so the tradition didn't stay for long, but the suits were sewn together with a golden or silver thread. If this piques your interest because of the golden threads in Nordkrei, same. But I have to put these in my lore crumbs folder for now. Since we're discussing Chinese history, let me give you some context regarding the religion that is Daoism. During the early dynasties, Confucianism was the first philosophical system that the Chinese adopted. This belief was more of a social construct of hierarchy, including respect for the elderly. Second came Daoism, founded by Lao Tzu during the Warring States period. This belief was the underlying cosmic rule that everything in life follows a flow or a path. The concept of Yin-Yang and Wu-Wei are all branches of Daoism. During the Han Dynasty, a trade route was created that opened up China to India and all of Western society. This was called the Silk Road. The travelers and merchants from India brought along their religion, so slowly Buddhism started to spread throughout China. Daoism and Buddhist concepts often get intertwined because translations of Buddhist scriptures used Taoist terminology to explain core concepts to the Chinese. Later, during the Song Dynasty, or the equivalent to the medieval times of China, the story of the Jade Emperor started to spread. The Jade Emperor was a deity who ascended to godhood through the extreme cultivation of Daoism. I will be comparing Nibelung's story to the Jade Emperor later on, but within the Jade Emperor's pantheon consists of 4 sovereign deities, 8 Immortals or Xianren, and other household deities. The 4 sovereigns are the typical Azure Dragon, Vermilion Bird, White Tiger, and the Black Tortoise. In the scope of Genshin though, the Adepti are represented by Xianren. They are immortal beings with strong spiritual powers through cultivation of their respective arts. The roster of Adepti we know now are inspired by mythical beasts and other household gods. Therefore, their influence on the world is still relatively contained. What we know of the history of Old Liyue, Morax was the prime Adepti. There was Cloud Retainer, Moon Carver, Mountain Shaper, Sea Gazer, Sky Bracer, and Street Ward Rambler. These 6 are important to distinguish from the rest because they are the perfected lords, as opposed to Herb Lord, who is just a lord. These 6 perfected lords in Chinese uses the characters Zhenjun at the end of their title. This translates to real lord. You see, in the Chinese pantheon, gods are able to promote and demote according to how well they do their job. So the more goodwill and faith that people have towards you, the higher rank you become. These Adepti can shapeshift between beast and human form. Cranes in Chinese culture signify longevity, while deers represent compassion. Other characters that are adeptal beasts include Ganyu as the Qilin and Yanfei as part Xiezhi. Both the Qilin and the Xiezhi are a mix of dragon and goat. And just like their characters, Qilins take immense care of all surrounding life, while Xiezhi are a symbol of justice. They have the special ability to distinguish right from wrong. Suani are also considered adepti beasts. Suani are a mix of dragon and lion. In folklore, they are one of the 9 sons of the dragon. While the Suani's other siblings have not been mentioned in-game, the Suani has siblings mixed with turtle, lizards, and fish that could explain the other creatures that we see around Tenyu Vale. Onto the lowest tier of gods in the pantheon. Marchosius is the god of stoves, and this god is a very common household deity. Since the stove is placed in the kitchen, and the kitchen is a core communion area in the house, this god is said to listen to all of your deeds and report them back to the Jade Emperor. This means we have to be extra careful around this guy because Guoba is a tattletale rat. Bringing it back to the 5.3 Lantern Rite, we were introduced to the 8 Adepts, 4 years after Liyue's story, insinuating this is the future of the city's story. While these Adepts have cultivated their crafts to become powerful beings, the roster of characters are referencing the 8 Immortals or Basian. These 8 have been very similar in descriptions to the characters in-game, including a roster of hermits, swordsmen, and even gourd magic. 3 of the 8 are part of the subgroup of the 3 hermits of Guizang. They are the Wind Reader who specializes in Qimeng art, the Yunlai Angler who is renowned for his swordsmanship, and the Wang Kid who utilizes Qi Huang sigils. Qimeng arts here can refer to a divination practice, while Qi Huang sigils could be the practice of traditional medicine. Onto the 2 sages of Lianshan. Sage Hu specializes in gourd crafts. This is very interesting because it's essentially the power of space. In the source material, this immortal was able to shrink himself or his gourd to be used like a subspace teapot. And Sage Jian, on the other hand, specializes in bronze mirrors. This practices a form of divination as well, using scrying method. Lastly, there were the 3 beasts of Taodo, who were the main powers that cleansed the god of borders during the Archon War, but more about them in a second. Outside of the named adeptal characters, the practice of the Dao are also seen in human characters. From ritualistic foods and plants, divinations and talisman practices, qi, and even afterlife ceremonies. The quest of this Lantern Rite follows the story of Hu Tao's fetter cleansing ritual, using the 7 and 8 gates in Taodo. They are all concepts branching from Daoism. The role of the Wangshen funeral parlor is to balance the forces of life and death within Liyue's ley lines. Director Hu's given name means peach. Her full name sounds like the Chinese word for butterfly peach. Since Hu could stand for Hudie, peaches are also very symbolic in Chinese culture as they are divine fruit of immortality. In the same quest we learned the story of Taodo, a giant tree god whose namesake could mean peach all. Taodo in-game was a god that borders life and death. To cross the borders of Taodo is to cross to the afterlife. And we see this when Hu Tao is about to sacrifice herself. Hu Tao's butterfly motif and her character's behaviors are all inspired by the acts of the Adepti named the Lone Butterfly of the Crimson Flame. This Adeptal butterfly was one of the 8 Adepts, but also one of the 3 beasts of Taodo. The 2 other beasts were the Golden Celadon Mare, as depicted in the Moonlit Bamboo Forest stories, and the Jade Plume Silverwing, who Lanyan represents. A note regarding Lanyan: her family cultivates a mix of arts between the Silverwing and the Wind Reader. That's why she was able to provide us with the information on human arts as well. So, food for thought. If Taodo is the guardian of life and death, maybe these 3 beasts, the butterfly, the mare, and the Silverwing, all have his powers of life and rebirth. The Crimson Butterfly has the powers of rebirth, the Jade Silverwing carried the winds and the souls of spirits, while the Golden Celadon Mare has the powers of material form and life. Now, to explain the concept of qi, we should take a trip to Bubu Pharmacy, where Beidou, as we know, is secretly researching immortality through the zombie qi. Zombies are what we call jiangshi in Chinese. They are still mythological beings under the family of Daoism. Jiangshi are beings that absorb qi, but specifically yang qi, because their decomposing bodies are full of yin qi. This is where Beidou's specialties lie. He's currently observing the notions of qi within the undead body, to learn the ways to extend human life. Along with the knowledge of qi, Beidou signed a contract with Changsheng that allowed him to swap bodies, or souls technically. We know this because Beidou has adeptal golden snake eyes, while Changsheng's is more human appearing and colored in magenta. By the way, Changsheng literally stands for long life in Chinese. Since their bodies are swapped, this allows Beidou to transfer sicknesses or ailments, or most of the times abyssal powers, into his own body, annihilating it with his own life force. In this case, the life force is an energy of vitality, and in theory, to cause an annihilation reaction with the abyss has to be some sort of rotting energy. These energy forces are Liyue's equivalent to qi, the spiritual energy of vitality and rot. I'm sure you've noticed by now that there's a big chunk of Liyue's characters I haven't really talked about, so I guess it's finally time for Xiao and the Yakshas. As mentioned before in our history lesson, Buddhism in China didn't exist until the Silk Road was made to connect China to the West. This is akin to a path being opened from Liyue to Sumeru. I guess the chasm is the Silk Road? It's probably seen better days. We can surmise that Sumeru was heavy on the Buddhism influence because the concept of samsara was introduced to us during its Archon Quest, right in our face. In Buddhism, samsara is the continuous, beginningless and endingless cycle of birth, death and rebirth. This cycle all pertains to a person's soul, and it's driven by a balance of karma, suffering, ignorance and cravings. In the quest, however, we were stuck in a subconscious loop or a dream, which is probably just more confirmation that souls and dreams are similar wavelengths of energy. Relating this back to Liyue, karma and fetters, both concepts tied to the samsara cycle. In the simplest form, karma is the universal cause and effect based on the intentional action one takes. Good intentions begets positive consequences, while ill intent will be met with suffering. What goes around comes around. On the other hand, fetter describes a mental chain that ties you to the cycle of suffering. They are what keeps you in the samsara. These blue-black fires are Genshin's equivalent to those chains. Although it's very interesting that they chose the spelling fetor rather than fetter, because fetor is more associated with smells, which is what the German translation got, while the Chinese localization says 死气. 死气 literally stands for death air. So I don't know if this is a localization error, but maybe now we know better. We know that this is a spiritual qi that translates to rotting energy, maybe akin to Chi-Chi's yin energy. So Chi-Chi's just carrying around bad spells in German, I guess. Back to serious business, to elaborate on fetter a bit more, just because I think this color coding of dark blue is going to be important later on. We see dark blue color coding in suspicious places, including floating blue souls all over the place, blue flames around Inazuma and Liyue, the powers of Dainsleaf, and maybe even the Lightkeeper's powers in Nordkrai. Fetter was described in the Lantern Quest as an abyssal energy that accelerates aging, causes fatigue, weakness, and could lead to death. All symptoms of rotting of the soul or overconsumption of death qi or zi qi. Not only was Chi-Chi somewhat resistant to its effect as a zombie, it also drove hilichurls into a frenzy. Last note, adepti like Xiao were able to see the blue fetter with their golden eyes, implying a connection between dark blue and gold. Other concepts of Buddhism include the enlightened beings of the Yakshas and rituals like the Homa and the Ganta, which is a bell-ringing ritual in Hindu practices. I'm sure there are plenty of videos out there regarding these concepts, looking at Ashikai's plentiful Homa research, so I'm going to keep this part brief. I do, however, want to talk quickly about Nirvana. Nirvana is a transcendent state that allows a person to escape the samsara cycle. To reach this state, one must practice mindfulness and eliminate greed, hatred, and ignorance. And in psychology terms, this just means breaking away from the ego completely. This transcendent state to escape a domain of reality or a new level of being is a very common story trope in Genshin, and Hoyoverse in general, I guess. We could see this as discovering the Philosopher's Stone from Kemiya, absorbing the abyssal powers to defeat the heavenly principles, or throwing yourself into the primordial sea to become the Natsitzenkreuz. Okay, so if this video is starting to feel more like a crash course on Chinese folklore, then I guess you wouldn't be too far off. You can blame Zhongli for having a lineage and lifespan for as long as all of the Chinese dynasties combined. To those that may have wondered where Zhongli's place was in my Jade video, while he was heavily associated with Jade, I believe the powers of Jade to just be draconic in nature. So, simply put, dragon powers are Jade powers, and because Zhongli is part dragon, therefore his powers may also come from a Jade. Rex Lapis is more than a money printer with his powers of Geo. His role in the world is likened to the Yellow Emperor in Chinese mythology. The Yellow Emperor, or Huangdi, was credited as one of the founders of Chinese civilization. He was the one who united all of the tribes and led them into a golden age. He fostered innovations like Chinese medicine, bronze coins, silk production, astronomy, and written language. His role was said to bridge the gap between man and God. And at the end of his life, he ascended into heaven and became the Yellow Dragon, but also the fifth direction, which was the center of the cosmos that guides the four other directions. The symbolism is quite apparent, so let's take it one step further. Because Zhongli has such a long lifespan that we still don't really know what happened at the start of it. Did he really have a childhood? Using Huangdi as a reference, the emperor was conceived after a woman witnessed a bolt of lightning hitting the ground, or an aurora borealis circling around the constellation of Big Dipper. The light was so bright that she got pregnant. Don't question it. And 2 years later, Huangdi was born. Huangdi's legacy was full of wars until he united all of the tribes. The Yellow Emperor had a brother who was the Flame Emperor. The Flame Emperor in Chinese is Yandi. Together they owned 2/3 of the 3 ancient tribes. They weren't exactly close brothers. They were seen as having a rivalry before their tribes combined into one people. The third tribe was known by a horned demon god with the powers to control weather. This god was jealous of the expansion of the Yan Huang, which is the tribes of the Yellow Emperor and the Flame Emperor together. So they waged war on them. The demon god was seen as the god of war because individually the brothers couldn't defeat him. It was only after they merged tribes that they were able to take over the east and defeat the demon god. I'm just going to do a mini theory section here, but it's very interesting to think of Zhongli having a long lost forgotten brother. This Flame Emperor in Genshin could be the pyro element or this blue flame of Feta that we've been introduced to. A quick reference to my last video, if blue Feta is the power of soul and rot, and golden is the power of matter and life, then these two brothers could just be yin-yang in power. However, there's more to the Flame Emperor than meets the eye. Yanti has another moniker they are known for, and it's called Shen Nong, the divine farmer. He is the deity who taught the people agriculture and cultivating crops. He also discovered medicinal tea through testing poison and antidotes through different herbs. This deity's association with fire may stem from the practice of burning crops to make way for new crops in the season. Because this knowledge was part of his teachings, that's why it was said that his people could wield the powers of fire. There are a lot of other stories that branch from these two emperors, including their individual interactions with mythical beasts and creatures, like the Chinese ox and its association with farming. Without any further resources in game though that I'm aware of, I turn to some Chinese mysticism to explain the dichotomy of life and death between these two gods. And guess what? We're going back to the practice of Qimeng divination. A lot of rituals within Daoism all emphasize the observing of celestial bodies to understand the cosmic order. Remember before when I talked about the Big Dipper and somehow caused the birth of the Yellow Emperor? Well, this constellation is also called Beidou in Chinese, and it is said to symbolize the heavenly palace of the Sky Emperor or a heavenly principle. Just when you thought astrology would be outside the realm of Daoism, wrong. The stars were very important to the ancient people as they used the stars as directional guide, and especially merchants who needed them to travel far. So I think Beidou being a character who sails the seas is very fitting. The stars in Beidou's constellation wields a lot more significance than we think, even if Beidou is just in the shape of a ladle. Within their cosmology, there is a Beidou and a Nandou. Bei means north, while Nan means south. Dou means the dipper part. Western society will know Nandou as Sagittarius. The pair of constellations symbolizes the dichotomy of life and death. The two opposite constellations were both represented by two old men. The North Dipper, who is a deity who governed the death registry, and controls everyone's time of death. He literally has a death note that records everyone's time of death, while the South Dipper governs birth and records all living history. I think that the Yellow Emperor, or Zhongli, and the Flame Emperor's stories could be incorporated with the deities of life and death in this situation. Rex Lap has created different beings, while his alleged flaming brother governed rotting and deaths. If you really thought about it, of the two Archons who survived the ancient times, Venti is an offshoot of Istaroth and is able to govern time and fairy souls, while Zhongli is genuinely chilling while being an occasional scapegoat. This leaves me to believe that Zhongli could have been contracted to only create life in a certain way, or not at all, because his legacy would indicate that he was able to do so according to the golden Adepti that's half the cast of Liyue, or even painting eyes on Ajdaha. What's important here is the concept of opposites as well. Life and death are polar opposite functions, but can't exist without one another. This teaching is highly emphasized in Daoism and is a major fundamental in Yin-Yang. And maybe, in the next part, if you've been wondering how the concepts of magnetism and kuvaki, or opposites attract, relate to Tevat's story outside romance, it might be here. The Yin-Yang iconography is immensely popular and everyone understands that it's essentially a perpetual state of opposites in balance. Yin stands for shadow, while Yang stands for light. Together they represent the concept of stillness and movement within everything in the universe. So yes, we can finally talk about Chongyun. This overheating exorcist with very convincing draconic-shaped pupils is always enveloped in yang energy. Yang, which is described as constant movement, takes physical toll on Chongyun's body. Therefore, he has to constantly eat ice pops to cool down. There is also the fun connection regarding yang possibly being the energy from the light realm, which could explain why he has draconic eyes. This perpetual state of yin-yang is governed and created through the Tao and the three pure ones. The trio of gods rank higher in power than the emperors and the adepti. It was said that the Tao created one, one produced two, two produced three, and three produce all things. The Tao is essentially the original principle within the cosmic chaos. Don't worry, I'll elaborate more on the Tao in 1 second, but within this chaos, one was created. The first pure being was titled the Jade Pure One and represented Wuji. This means no extreme. The first being created two, the Supreme Pure One, who connected the realms of the earth in spirituality. They represented Daji. Daji stands for big extreme. This phase is the creation of yin-yang basically, and the cycle of never-ending beginnings. From the second Pure One was born the Grand Pure One, who is associated with the realm of humanity and preach laws and bring civilization to all living beings. In terms of the hierarchy of gods within Genshin, the level of command above the Archons would be the Four Shades, and above the Four Shades is the Heavenly Principles. Since the Archons would have been equivalent to the Emperors of the Taoist pantheon, the Four Shades could have been one tier above that, being the third Pure One's role of upholding laws and civilization. Above the Shades could lie the second Pure One's authority over the perpetual cycle and the Heavenly Principle. Maybe that could be Fanes. The Jade Pure One is a being who governed the original authority of everything in the world. This is comparable to Nibelung, of course, but this hierarchy doesn't have to be the gods ranking specifically. I guess you could say that I'm just sowing seeds here. The world of light was created, and this was the domain of the Jade Pure One, or Nibelung. The Jade Pure One's presence created the will of the second Pure One, Fanes. Fanes, or Phanes, who was born from a cosmic egg within the abyss, had powers likened to the Supreme Pure One who governed over the yin-yang. This maybe means that Fanes could use both the powers of light and abyss realm. By default, this puts Fanes at a higher authority. Fanes was born when Nibelung traveled to the abyss, and they essentially swapped places, and Fanes usurped the world of Teyvat. That's when Fanes created the Four Shades with the powers of light and dark realm, who upheld the rules of the Heavenly Principles. By the way, if you're wondering how Fanes isn't able to defeat the Abyss while he has the same powers, that's because the Abyss has the powers to mutate and learn while Fanes is stuck in a perpetual sleep at the moment, so who's really driving progress here? While I would love to further speculate on Heavenly Principles, this video is still about Nibelung's world building, so they can have their moment another time. Nibelung's authority is likened to the role of the Jade Emperor, and the Jade Emperor is also often identified as the Jade Pure One. All of them assume the role of the highest deity of the world with the authority of everything. To explain the origins of the Jade Emperor, there are varied sources of how he came to be or what position in heaven he ended up ascending to. It was said that the Jade Emperor grew up as a crowned prince in an old kingdom of heavenly light. At birth, he emitted a wondrous light that filled the entire kingdom. He grew up kind and generous. One day, after ascending to the throne after his father's death, he told his ministers he wished to cultivate Tao. He wanted everyone in his kingdom to find peace and contentment, so he spent 1,750 eons cultivating, until he reached golden immortality. Another 100 million years of cultivating later, he finally became the Jade Emperor. While we don't know exactly how powerful Nibelung got after cultivating in the Abyss, I believe both the Jade Emperors had the same intention of wanting peace and prosperity, therefore they left to get stronger. What we do know is that Nibelung ruled over the light realm, or the powers of Yang, yet he governed black. Visually, this almost looks like he is the first stage of the Tao, which means no extremes or Wuji, governed by the first pure one. You could argue that the Dragon King only got his powers of black after cultivating in the Abyss. Either way, he was the forces of black within the realm of white, the stillness within the sphere of movement. In the first video of this series, we separated green into yellow and blue. Here we're looking at black versus white. The story of black and white is quite a common trope, and I grew up watching Bleach, so I've seen a plethora of world building that references a similar concept. Nibelung's power of black in this case can be assumed to encompass all the colors. He ruled over the 7 rainbow sovereigns after all. The world building of Hoyoverse really enjoys the concept of equilibrium, so I would like to really hammer down the concept of opposites and balance in our current timeline. Kuvaki, the magnetic powers of the moon that was introduced to us in the first patch of Nod Cry, functions in the way that we are all familiar with. Opposites attract and like repel like. Even though so far they've only used it to explain tidal changes, this energy system works off polar charges and is a perfect way to show, not tell, the themes of opposites. Like I said before, while this can kind of lead to romance themes, like opposites attract, duh, our future storytelling as well could demonstrate what happens when the balance is lost. Before Kuvaki, I'm sure we can think of all of the other polar energies in the world, from Numa Osea, the powers of Sun against the Night Kingdom, the Light Realm powers against the Abyss, life energies against the powers of Decay, even the plot lines in the future regarding Silver and Gold. But here's the thing about polar extremes in Kuvaki. Kuvaki works off electromagnetism, and you know what else is on the spectrum of these? Ultraviolet and infrared. This to me is a final nod to the fact that the higher powers work off wavelengths, including magnetic waves and the visible spectrum, on top of sound and music of course. Ultraviolet in this case must represent the powers of the Abyss, while the opposite, the Heavenly Principles, wield the power of the infrared. I don't think this is too far-fetched to imagine because Renova and Arlecchino's representation of the Crimson Red is much deeper in colour, Asmodee is also wielding the same red shift to her powers. All this to say there must be a balance to everything in Teyvat, and the Heavenly Principles and the Order of Dao as well. Scaling outside of Teyvat's magnetic field, in the space of black and white, one cannot exist without another, as there will be no balance. Because Yin produced stillness and Yang produced movement, if Nibelung reigned over the realm of progress and movement as the Black Sun, what if his stillness in heaven brought about the Abyss and the Black Plague to the world? That's why, to deal with this, he had to descend to the Abyss without knowing that there was a mirror entity that was growing in an egg. To achieve the same balance of the world's order, Funnus had to be born into the world while Nibelung sought death. This balance in the world was the natural order, and it truly is unclear whether or not any of the rulers in heaven, including Funnus, understood this law. To give everyone the benefit of the doubt though, I believe they would have made what's best for their respective people, but sooner or later, the Abyss would taint the world due to an imbalance in power. A new variable that's been added to the world to tip the scales. This could be who we regard as descenders. If you're curious to hear more about this concept, might be in my next script, so sit tight, and I promise I won't take another month. Now we're at the meat and bones of this theory. We're finally going to talk about the Tao. You may be wondering why there are so many branches of this one philosophy and where it all stems from. The Taoist scripture is actually bigger than the Bible and the Quran, but what really is the Tao? The Tao literally stands for the road or path. This is the principle, as mentioned before, that everything has an ebb and flow and that reaches an equilibrium of good and bad. The best way to live is to just let go and go with the flow and abandon all ego. In the context of Genshin, this could be a higher order outside of the borders of Teyvat, or the primary heavenly principle. So maybe I can explain it easier in a higher plane of existence, and of course I mean the Honkai Star Rail universe. A huge disclosure here as well, I've never actually played Honkai 3rd or gotten past Penaconian Star Rail, but I do keep up with the story and I do research here and there. So I would just like to bring your attention to Long, the Permanence, and just imagine that these worlds are connected for a second. The Aeon of Permanence was a black and white dragon. He was a being roaming the burgeoning chaos seeking the answer to existence. Through searching for his answer, they created an egg, and thus the Path of Permanence was born. The Path of Permanence's teaching is literally one-to-one to the way of the Tao. It is a permanent cycle of following the black and white, good and bad, ebb and flow. I'm just throwing out food for thought here. What if Nibelung was an ink black dragon that was born from Long the Permanence? I'm not just saying that because they're both black dragons, but Teyvat does seem like a universe that's been recreated over and over with a formulaic cycle of introducing a higher power and then balancing out said power. This world also follows the formula of the Permanence being enveloped by black and still surviving. Because it's the obligatory crack theory at the end of the video time, the thought actually is that Akivili is trailblazing within the world that Long the Permanence has made. I know that Long the Permanence is missing as well as Akivili. Maybe it was a deal that they made, maybe Akivili are the twins, maybe they were the Voyager, but I'm pretty sure Aeons have golden blood, like Nanook. That could be the origins of our golden blood here. They also do need a higher power to be introduced in this realm after all. Maybe Teyvat ascending into a higher power means that they would exist in the Star Rail universe. Also, correct me if I'm wrong, the current Star Rail story still has Dan Heng still collecting powers, so Neither the Permanents or the Trailblazers' path stories are close to being done. Neither are the Traveler twins. So I guess I'm manifesting a crossover in the universe where the story of Nibelung and Long the Permanents happens at the same time. Okay, yeah, I don't know. That was definitely a crack theory that I wanted to just throw in there because obviously paths, the path, the Dao, duh, I had to make that correlation. Anyway, okay, so there's a lot to conclude here. We've done the Liyue tour from most of the characters, talking about how Daoism is intrinsically tied to the region but also the hierarchy of gods. There are household gods to Xianren, which are represented by Adepti in game. Above them are the emperors, represented by Zhongli and other archons, and possibly his brother that is the Flame Emperor. The four shades are the tier higher, representing the third pure one. They regulate the laws of the world set by the heavenly principles. The second pure one, who governs the power of Yin-Yang, could be Fanes, or the current heavenly principles. The first pure one within the Taoist pantheon is represented by Nibelung, or the Jade Emperor. The Jade Emperor has lots of ties and parallels with the Dragon King. Outside of the use of pearls and jade, Nibelung also wielded the power of black, similar to the process of creating the yin-yang balance of the world. We theorize that every new energy or descender should have a pair for the sake of balance and equilibrium. This process of permanent cycle of life could be the method that Long the Permanence achieved in his Aeonhood. His power and authority on black and white may be how the cycle of Teyvat begins and ends. If you made it to this part of the video, I would love to thank you so much. My next video should be a discussion on the powers of the Four Shades along with some Descenders and the Wheel of Fate tea. I've gone back to add citations and corrections in my first video, and thank you so much for all of the love and support on that one. I was definitely flawed, and I'll definitely do the same in the pinned comments in this one, so you can look out for that. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe and leave a comment. My name is Gemini Traveler, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye! The role of Lex Rappus, oh, or Big Dipper, who is a gaiety, oh my god.